Welcome to the Global Dads Council podcast, where we discuss and debate the most pressing issues for fathers and men around the world. I'm Paul Sullivan, founder of the Company of Dads. Today, in episode 3, we're going to talk about work-life balance. It's a term that gets used a ton. Personally, it's one that annoys me because I think we just have life and we fit all kinds of things into life. But all of us who have jobs, we're seeing, what men who are dads and women who are moms are struggling with coming out of the pandemic. So we're going to focus on this hot topic. Hanson, why don't you take us out and tell us, what you're seeing from your membership and some of the organizations that you work with in the UK?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So this is an area we've done a lot of work in for a few years now. The reason for that is, even though we talk a lot about the generational shift that's happening for fathers across the world, on the whole, organizations and organizational progress has been a lot slower. I think there's still this belief that dads across a lot of industries should really just be at work, quote unquote. I think there are a number of different organizational structures that keep dads at work. I think when you compound that with sometimes men's own silence, and I think as well, the kind of probably the lack of safe space to really have a conversation and to be open for fear of reprisal or to put on the B League or sometimes be given grunt work, further compounds that issue. So we actually did a research project with Deloitte back in 2019, just pre the pandemic, and then we followed that up a couple of years later with our Dads in Lockdown study. And what we found was that a huge number of dads in the UK, so it was a qual and quant research process with over 2,000 working dads across the UK. And what we found is that a great number were looking for a different type of work-life pattern, but not really finding it. So we found, for instance, that at the time, I think it was 14% of all the dads we interviewed were requesting things like working from home 1 to 2 days a week, that a lot of us probably see as relatively just default now. But at the time, less than 1 in 5, so about 19% of that 14% was actually being formally granted that. And I think there's a number of different structural things that really need to change in regards of working patterns, in terms of how dads feel comfortable, what's really going to unlock real thriving for dads in organizations. And I think the thing I see a lot as well is that so often people think of this just as a dad's issue, and it really isn't, because actually unlocking dads at work is really about unlocking families. It's about unlocking what's right for partner and ultimately what's great for kids and the whole family. So it really is that kind of missing link in terms of wider gender equality. So we do a lot of things around workshops, talks, we embed different mentoring programs in different organizations. And part of that is because actually what we want to start to see is not so much just that cultural leadership top down, but actually some of that behavior bottom up as well. And actually for dads, experienced dads and dads to be, to start to connect and actually bring more of that dad identity to life. So something we're super passionate about. And I think it always fascinates me because I think a lot of this is also very cultural. In Japan and certain areas of Asia, the policies around things like paternity leave, for instance, are actually very generous, but the take up is not at all high. And there's a deeper conversation to be unlocked there.
Yeah, we did an early podcast, a couple of these. One was looking at, in the United States, the average paternity leave that a man took was a day, which is crazy because that's the average. And I remember when my last child was born, I have 3, I took a month, and so, which isn't even very long, but in the US it's a long time. And so I'm skewing the average at a month, but there it is, just 1 day. So think of all the dads who take no time off, and paternity leave is obviously a big issue here in the US. But I want to throw the question out there. What about, for those things that, you can't plan for? Like, look, we've all had kids. We know it's tough the first couple months, particularly your first one, to get used to the rhythm, but it's not like it gets easier. It's not like, 13-year-olds don't have problems and need their mom or dad to come home from work. Brian, what are you seeing in Singapore with your organization? And I know you have a mom connection with your organization as well, but what are you seeing in Singapore with, how people are looking at their life and the way they divide up their life between, working working, parenting, and being with their spouse in this, quasi post-pandemic world?
Yes, I think in this, I have to say that thanks to the pandemic, in a way, we've been given a new uh, vision of new possibilities of how work and life could be integrated. Because for the longest, I mean, traditionally, men in Singapore used to be the primary providers. Increasingly over the years, we find that more women are going into joining the workforce. But what doesn't change culturally, the expectations of our moms to still manage the household stuff. So you find that, dad and mom goes to work. When both come back, mom still has to manage the home while dad's, start to chill a little. Increasingly, we've been encouraging more men to take on shared parenting, to take on shared household responsibilities. And that affects even the corporate culture too, or the whole narrative about who should be picking up the call when the school calls, or when the child needs to be tended to, who's the one who's going to be taking leave, right? More often than not, it's always the mom. And so we've been trying to, I mean, we as an organization, a Center for Fathering and That's for Life in Singapore, have been engaging a lot of the corporate entities as well as the government to try to shape the narrative to make it more conducive, not just at workplaces, but even in the community, in our society, for dads to be able to, play a more active role in the home, to not be and not leave it to moms to do that. We've even started an award. It's called the Great Companies for Dad Award, that we give out every year by the President of Singapore to recognize companies that have very family-centric policies, that have good take-up rates of paternity leave that goes beyond regulated stipulations of what family-centric policies should be. But I think more importantly, we also try to get our constituents, the dads in Singapore, to model what it would be like for us to be seen, to be leading, to be excelling at work as we excel at home, right? We want leadership at home. We want men to be able to thrive both at the workplace and also in the home, as we do in the community. So those are the kind of, like you say, Paul, it's one life and all the things in, and we just want to make it integrated so that our children, like my children during the pandemic, they see the same Brian at work at my desk, as I am as a husband to their mother, and as I am as a dad to them, and also as I am as a son to their grandparents. They need to see that integrated self and not have me have 4 different faces in those different scenarios. And I think the pandemic has forced us men in Singapore especially to be more aware of how we deal with all the various roles that we're expected to do in front of our children, to be authentic and to embrace vulnerability as we tackle the kind of challenges that's presented to us at home.
Yeah, that makes me think of this piece of research that I saw earlier this year that came out of the pandemic, in which this sociologist down in Georgia in the United States was able to survey a whole bunch of different families and how they operated during the pandemic. And so they're all different categories. And so the families where husband and wife were both working from home and still doing the same things, i.e. the wife was doing the second shift, is what we call it here in the United States, the second shift, we're doing everything, and the dad wasn't. Shock. It didn't really work out very well, because once you could see what the other person was doing, and you could see the work that person was doing, the other spouse rightly got a little upset. And the model that worked here the best wasn't even a clear division of labor. It was this model where one parent did a lot, and then the other parent was there to always have her back, always be the backup, and to be there to do when that parent had a crucial call and couldn't get off the phone, or that parent had to couldn't be interrupted. It was that other parent changing, typically the man, but changing his schedule around. So it was more of a 70-30 split than a 95-5 split. Rupesh, I'd be interested, Brian touched on, his kids seeing him as the whole person, not just as a worker, as a dad and a husband, but also as a son. When thinking about his own parents. You and I, Rupesh, have talked in the past about multi-generational families living together in India, how that affects the dynamic. Maybe you can talk a bit about the work-life balance as you're seeing it in the Cool Dads Club there in Bombay.
Yeah, so it's actually quite right. Each of these things are very sensitive to the background, the cultures of where dads come from. If you look at India, India has been very traditionally oriented towards looking at fathers purely as the financial providers, the kind of bread earners of the family, and that's how it has been for many decades. While you could say that things are transforming a little bit, but I think because of the fact that most of the families are very integrated still in India, where you would find the dad still living with his parents. He may have his in-laws as well, very close by to him. Most of the older generation dads have never complained or raised the voice against this work-life balance. Primarily because the kids were getting managed at home. Either the wife was at home or his own parents, the grandparents. There is a larger support structure in place which takes care of the child. So the only thing that these dads had to worry about was to be at work, focus on his career, come back home, spend a little bit of time with the kids, and not worry about what else he has to do with the child. But that's how it has been going on for many, many years. There is a slight change definitely taking place with the younger generation dads who I think are more wanting to be involved. I think that's coming from within. It is not the company culture. It is not the way they have been raised. And I can say that very confidently because when I interview a lot of dads for the Cool Dads Club, the younger dads have a very different viewpoint on this. They don't believe that the company culture has got to do with anything. They are of the opinion that if I want to do it, then I should voice it. If I need to go back home to sit with my child for an exam that is tomorrow, then I should voice it. If you're not going to voice it, the company is not going to change its policies. And as we all know, cultures of organizations don't change overnight. There has to be a very collective effort, focus, which needs to come together by a lot of dads and say that we want to do this. And it can only start with one person. That's how the ripple effect takes place. So while we can say that the companies have to have structures and policies in place, but if the father is not going to take the initiative, if the father is not going to take the responsibility of wanting to do it, if he's not going to voice it, nobody's going to listen to him. And I think that's the important part that needs to take place. I'm of the firm belief that if dads start taking responsibility of doing things, which traditionally have fallen, for moms to do it, the structures will fall into place, the policies will fall into place, the infrastructure will get created.
That's really interesting.
But it has to start with, people talking about it, people wanting to be part of it. Like I can give you my own personal example. When I used to work in my corporate environment and I used to say, I need to go back home to take my wife to the doctor or to take my child to a doctor. And at the other end, all my colleagues were going out for a, get together for a team dinner. I would be labeled as not a team player, right? Because I was the black sheep. I used to be looked down upon and said that, oh, how can you, go back home when there are 15 people who wanting to, meet up as a team. But this is what I wanted to do. So yes, there are repercussions for that as well. You can get labeled as not being a team player, not wanting to be out there with the team. But I think each person has got to prioritize his own life.
Yeah, Rupesh, kudos to you for being the person who quote unquote wasn't the team player and saying this is what I want to do, because the research we see here in the US is if you were to poll these men, they would say, yes, I want to go home and do that as well, or yes, I want to go and do that. But at least here, some of the research that we've done or some of the research I've read as well says that it really starts at the leadership level. And so if the person who is the manager puts his schedule out there, and on that schedule, you can see on his calendar, you can see, oh, okay, he's going here to do something on a Tuesday for his daughter, or oh, here next Friday he has something to do with his son. It's really that leader who, you know, is setting the tone, and then allowing men to feel like, oh, okay, I guess I can do this. You know, I won't be penalized, because again, the research here is that, you know, look, it is really well known how in the United States, working moms get penalized for having children and being caregivers. And I'm sure it's similar where you guys are. But, you know, for men, it's the penalty is different. It's you are not committed to your job. You are not a committed worker. Where what it's really saying is you're a human, and part of your life is being a worker, but part of it is being a dad and husband and all this. You know, I'd be interested, you know, Hanson, since you've done you know, a lot of research, you mentioned some of the work you've done with Deloitte, and I think of, you know, professional services companies, you know, law firms as the types of companies that really have to, you know, all companies have to address this, but some of them have been a little better in addressing this, because they don't want to lose their senior female partners, and they don't want, you know, the best ones, they don't want their senior male partners to be essentially sociopaths who never see their families. What is some of the stuff that you found, you know, research wise, particularly as it pertains to, you know, this period, you know, post lockdown as we emerge from the pandemic?
There's one big call out stat that the research did uncover, and this was both in the pre-pandemic research and also in the post-pandemic research. It was oddly similar figures, which was that 33% of all first-time fathers had actually left their jobs in order to find better work-life balance. And another 33% on top of that were quote unquote actively looking. And so you've got this state of play where 2/3 of a modern day dad audience on average are in some level of flux in an organization, which, you know, has huge ramifications in terms of, as you mentioned, talent, recruitment, retention. The thing that I find really interesting, and it builds on Rupesh's point really about a younger generation in some ways being more vocal, and I think we're almost seeing the pendulum swing from one way to the other at the moment, where, you know, a couple of years ago, I think we've seen more men, more families as a whole almost accept this state of burnout and actually just working super hard, you know, all of the good hours of the day, and then actually just, you know, meandering really to this mental and physical burnout. And I think we've almost seen it swing the other way in recent times in terms of this kind of quiet quitting that's happening, I think, you know, all across the world, and sort of doing the bare minimum. The thing that's interesting for me is, and I had this meeting earlier this week with, I'm on the advisory board of an organization called Flexpo, who do lots of events around workplace culture. And actually, what was so enlightening in that session was that we were talking about, well, actually, there are certain structures and policies and things that actually necessitate great working practice. And I think we've almost got a danger around the corner and a challenge that actually, in sort of giving away too much as an organization, we become actually very, very loose, shall we say. And actually, there is a certain point where people can't necessarily have everything. And I think the sort of emerging challenge for me is not so much that we shouldn't stand up for important rights, and I think fathers have still got a heck of a long way to go in that, but I think there is a sort of balancing act with things that actually necessitate how organizations need to run. And so it's just a little watch out, and I'd be interested in hearing all of your perspectives on that, I guess. And we were talking about specifically about office working, for instance, about how, you know, there's lots of people kind of rebelling against coming back to the office. And for a lot of tasks and jobs and roles, that's absolutely, you know, fine for the majority. But there is something about face-to-face collaboration that gets us somewhere quicker, further, better than sort of remote working will. And so there is a balancing out there. But I'd be really interested to sort of hear what's happening within your regions around that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that first, and two examples really come to mind. The first is where there's a a very large sort of sports marketing firm that is mandating everybody's back in the office 4 days a week. So 4 out of the 5 days a week, you have to be back, which means nobody is going to be there on Friday, and everybody's really going to take Friday off, and it's not going well. And even, one of my contacts there, who's a senior partner, he's getting in there 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and they're getting reprimanded. But there's no real reason for them to be in there 4 days. It's not very, structured. It's just the idea that, we'll be here, we'll collaborate more. And people are pushing back. And I counter that with a law firm that I know very well, where it's asking people to come in 3 days a week. They're not checking rigorously, but one thing they are doing is every team within that law firm. So employment law, real estate law, whatever your team is, they have to pick one day and be in there, and they all have to be in there that one day. So one of my contacts there who works employment law, their day is Thursday. So pretty much no matter what, you have to be there on Thursday, because, here's the other problem. If you say come in 3 days a week, well, somebody could come in, Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week, and then the next week they could come in, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and you could get to this point where you're not really overlapping. So it seems to, in that situation, we're having 3 days not really being a nanny and checking on people, but having that one designated day is working pretty well. What's going on in Singapore, Brian? What is the situation there for people being asked to be in the office or not being asked to be in the office?
Yeah, I think the challenges that we face here is pretty much the same as what you see in the States, in UK, even possibly in India also. We have now the issue of quiet quitting is starting to rise, even quiet firing on the other end of the spectrum. We have people being resistant to going back and all. And one of the things that we are trying really hard to do is to have that conversation between employers and staff on coming to the shared consensus or an agreement that flexible, that as much as we want to be affording everyone flexibility of work for better integration of life, we also want to be conscious about the need for the organization to be profitable. So it's about the balance between profitability as well as the latitude that they get in the way the work is being done. And that's where I realize that a lot of I call them big boy conversations start to take place, right? Like how we need to be we can have it all, but maybe not at the same time.
Yeah.
Some of the things that even I do in my organization is to ensure that everyone knows the desired outcomes. Everyone knows the timelines and all, and everyone knows when they need to be present, and they just schedule their work around it. Make sure that we don't allow any of the deadlines to slip, right? So that it's really outcome based, and to have everyone level up to that same state or level of maturity in order to have these kind of conversations, in order to impose expectations, and to make everyone accountable for what they are to steward, whether it's resource, whether it's the work, whether it's relationship. We're starting to place a lot more focus on all of these things as an organization, so that we can kind of still provide that flexibility without compromising our profitability.
Mm-hmm. And Rupesh, to you, what's happening, around Bombay and, among some of the dads who are part of the Cool Dads Club? How are they balancing this return to work mandate with what they got used to, during the pandemic, when we're all able to work from home?
So yeah, I think out here the journey has been quite interesting and quite shocking as well for a lot of dads during the pandemic. Contrary to other countries, US, UK, or Singapore, in India, most of the dads had to never participate in household chores. They had to never show their face to do anything, because you have, helpers, you have, maids, you have nannies to take care of everything that is required to be done. It's a labor intensive, country. We have 1.3 billion people out here. So it actually came as a rude shock to a lot of fathers that they have to end up doing things which they had never imagined. But what was interesting was when I spoke to some of these dads, during these times, they took up this responsibility quite well, most of them, which just went to show that if the responsibility comes, they are more than willing to do it. Yes, there was a pressure to do it because the wives, made them do it this time. There was no other option, but they fit into the role quite well. And I think that has also made a lot of dads realize that the importance of being at home is so critical. For the first time, they were able to see the dynamics taking place between the mother and the child, which was never the case for most of the dads, because they left in the morning at 8 o'clock and came back at 9, 10 in the night. So they were never aware of these dynamics taking place during the day. So I think a lot of dads have started appreciating the work that is being done by their wives. And they are now wanting to be more involved in their children's lives. They are wanting to participate a lot more. So it's a slight shift that has taken place. It's not a huge change, but you could probably say in single digits, dads are now wanting to, stay at home and, work with their managers, work with their leaders to figure out a method of how they can, spend those, crucial hours at home, during the week, not just the weekends. So in some way or the other, the pandemic has actually made a lot of dads get a taste of family life, which was, not the case for many decades out here.
And that's a great spot to end, because I always like to end on an optimistic note. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Global Dad Podcast. Please reach out to us individually. Our emails are at the end of this, or connect with us on LinkedIn.